Hello and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's always wonderful having you here. You might hear some birds chirping away in the background. They've been pretty active today. I think there's a lot of nesting going on, and instead of trying to drown out that sound, I thought I would just let you enjoy it too. So yeah, enjoy the birds. This week's episode is completely focused on you as the dog parent, especially if you're the parent of a reactive or challenging pup like Lucky. One of our lovely members of this Mystic Dog Mama community reached out to me recently. She and I were chatting on Instagram about our shared experiences and challenges of having a reactive dog. And because I'm always telling you guys that I'm all ears when it comes to your recommendations for guests to have on the podcast, she suggested that I bring this week's guest, Jess Adam of Handlers and Humans, onto the podcast to talk to us about how to support ourselves on the human end of the leash. Handlers and Humans is all about bringing mental health to the dog world, and Jess is the perfect person to do this. As a licensed psychotherapist, she is also the mom to a beautiful 10-year-old lab pit mix named Dio, who's experienced his fair share of challenges with anxiety and reactivity, as well as being a lovable, silly, perfect boy. Through Handlers and Humans, Jess brings her skills and experience from the mental health and coaching worlds to help other dog parents navigate the highs, lows, and various challenges that come with the territory of having a dog who struggles a bit with some of the aspects of this human world. She also helps dog trainers know how to better support their human clients. This is such an important conversation to be having. When we have a reactive dog or a dog with other complex feelings and behaviors, it can be tempting to keep the focus on their behaviors, their needs, and keeping them under threshold. But I know firsthand, as I'm sure many of you do too, that when we have reactive encounters, when we're out with our dogs, we too experience the fear, shame, embarrassment, and even trauma associated with those encounters. And this can send us over threshold as well. Speaking for myself, I know that my nervous system can become just as dysregulated as Lucky's due to an off-lead dog running up to him, or simply because I have to be constantly vigilant, looking out for potential triggers that we need to avoid. Quite honestly, it's exhausting, and it can feel really isolating too. So I'm thrilled that Jess is having this conversation with us today to highlight the need to care for our own mental health and recognize our own thresholds. She also shares some really great tips for how to do just that. Stay tuned through the outro where I'll share my top 3 takeaways from this chat. And I'd love it if you'd message me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama to share your favorite nuggets too that you got from this episode. Jess and I cover a lot of ground, from allowing ourselves to actually feel the grief that comes when our expectations of having a dog don't actually match our experience, to acknowledging the emotional impact of having a reactive dog on us, and finally to getting to the point where we can see the gifts that lie within life with a complex dog. I know you're going to get so much out of this episode, and it's my hope that you leave this feeling seen, as well as having some practical things that you can do today to support yourself on your journey with your dog. And don't forget, I'm holding a giveaway to win a free animal communication session. If you'd like to be considered for the opportunity to win this free animal communication session with your pet, all you have to do is rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Take a screenshot of your review and send it to me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. I'll draw one lucky name and announce the winner in our special 6-month anniversary episode that airs Saturday, June 8th, 2024. To be considered for this, please make sure to send me your screenshot no later than Friday, May 24th, 2024. Finally, a quick note that this episode was sponsored by Aspirationary, which in full transparency is another project of mine, where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to help you become all you aspire to be. You can check out our shadow work and moon magic journals and workbooks as well as our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens on Instagram at Aspirationary. That's spelled ASPIRATIONERY. Okay, on that note, grab your leash and let's go. Hi, Jess. Welcome to the Mystic Dog Mama podcast. It's so amazing to have you here with me today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Oh, I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. And to let the
Hmm.
listeners know a little bit of why I reached out to you, I actually had an amazing listener contact me because at the end of
Oh,
every episode, I ask people, if there's a topic that you want to have addressed on the podcast or there's a particular guest you want me to talk to, I'm all ears. And she got in touch and she's actually in one of your programs. And she said,
oh,
yeah, she was like, I think Jess would be amazing, and her work has helped me so much. And I think it would help other people to hear about it and talk about it. So that's what,
oh
yeah.
my
So
gosh. I don't think I knew that. That means so much to me. Oh my
there you
gosh.
go. There you go. Yeah. So I thought as soon as I checked out your work, I was really grateful that she made
Mm.
me aware of you and what you're doing. I was like, oh, this is so in alignment with what we're doing with Mystic Dog Mama. And I think absolutely I can benefit from this conversation. And
Yeah.
I know so many of our listeners can benefit as well. So I'm really excited to have you here today.
Yeah, oh my gosh. That's so great. I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I wanted to just kind of like briefly say as well that the big interest that I have about your work, and I want you to explain a little bit more about handlers and humans and what you're doing with it. But the thing that I found really exciting is that you're filling this gap in the market that addresses the mental health component of the owner when it
Hmm.
comes to those of us who have reactive dogs. And even if you don't have a reactive dog, I think the work you're doing is really helpful for recognizing you as the human on the other end of that leash have
Hmm.
needs and have emotions that are going to be challenged by our lovely little teachers dressed up in fur.
Yes. Our lovely teachers. I love that. Dressed up in fur. Yes, they are. They're in their own little costume, and you don't realize that they're a teacher until suddenly you really realize it, and then you're in the middle of it. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly.
I think that that gap is that's my goal. Like I'm very grateful that you described it that way because that's actually what I very much want to be communicating, that the training is so essential and so important, and is nothing I would ever advise someone look away from, right? But we have a great conversation coming up, I feel like, in the dog world recently, where we are talking more and more about mental health, but there's not really the how, right? Like the tools are not necessarily there. So the awareness is there, which is incredible because that is the first step to any kind of change is bringing awareness. Um, and it's really important, and a lot of people are talking about it. But where I want to come in is to say, okay, here are tools for dog people. Here are mental health skills that are universal, certainly, but being delivered in a way that is tailored to what I know firsthand you are going through if you have a complex dog, a challenging dog, etc. Right? So the tools that I'm teaching are not specific to dog people, but I want to present them to dog people in a way that helps them with the very unique challenges and emotional experiences that we go through and that not a lot of people understand in our lives unless they have had a challenging dog themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I wondered if you could kind of give a little bit of your backstory as well, because like you said, you're
Yeah.
talking about this from a personal experience of
Yep.
your dog kind of challenging you, and then you being able to bring your experience as a professional therapist to the
Mhm.
fore, but through that lens of your little teacher asking you to do so.
Yes. So personal experience for real, big time. So if you are someone who has a dog that has reactive behaviors, resource guarding behaviors, a lot of anxiety, I was and am very much in your shoes still. So I say that because, my dog is 10 now. He and I have been through a lot. We've been on quite the journey for the last 10 years together. So I always talk about years like 1 through 4 being a hot mess for both of us, right? Not just for him and his behavior, but me and my emotional response to it. And you should not assume that just because someone is a therapist that they are handling things the way that they might suggest that you handle things. Even though I'm a mental health professional, I still have my own mental health stuff. And Dio absolutely triggered a lot of that. He challenged a lot of that. He poked at all of my perfectionism stuff and he poked at all of my people pleasing stuff. And I mean, I could go on and on. And I had very specific goals for he and I really wanted him to be a therapy dog, to come to work with me, to work with clients with me, which is a whole other story. But he did sort of pass the behavioral evaluations after many years and lots of work, but he is not suited to be a therapy dog. So that didn't come to fruition. Well, it did actually. And then I realized that it was not a good fit for him. And he was really telling me that it wasn't a good fit for him. So I backed off of that. And he's just my personal therapy dog basically now, which is fine. But I had expectations. I had emotional fallout from what I was going through with him. I felt a lot of shame. I felt a lot of guilt, a lot of anxiety. And most of all, this was early on, right, in my life with him. And so I was thinking about how many years ahead I had of this experience, this emotional intensity, this burnout that I was in, this behavior from him. And I was doing all the things. Like this is my story is that I tell everyone I was at every training, socialization, thing I could possibly do, groups, individuals, you name it, taking him to the chiropractor, getting him acupuncture, all of it, everything, looking at his nutrition, stuff like that. And we were still where we were. We were making progress. I mean, he certainly got a lot better. We had a much better bond and relationship. But thinking about how I was being emotionally impacted and about how that was not sustainable for the length of time that I hoped to have with him. And I really did get to a point where I wasn't sure if I could keep him. I didn't know if I was the person for him or if I had the capacity to do what he needed. And it really was that moment when I really hit a wall. We kind of had a big incident that was very hard for me. And we got to this point where there was nothing more to do for him or with him. It was me that I had to look at. And not in the sense that I'm causing his anxiety or I'm causing his behavioral issues, because I take issue with those phrases in some ways, but really because we are in a relationship and there are two of us. And therefore, it's not all on one person to one part of the relationship to make the change in a relationship to improve it, right? So this is what I tell all of my clients is how can we create sustainability for you in your life with your dog? If you are committing to life with this dog, full on whole life with them, how can we make that sustainable for you? And that's really where I'm trying to bring tools that are tailored for people to get to that place.
Oh, that's so helpful. There's so many great things in what you said, and I can relate to so much of what you are saying about your experience with your dog, because that's definitely been my situation with Lucky.
Mm.
And I remember even coming across training videos that were talking about, if you're anxious, you're sending that anxiety down the leash to your dog, and that's what's possibly causing them to bark. And it's like, I'm actually anxious because of what he's shown
Because
me in
you
the
said
past.
just because you said this, yeah. And I mean, I'm more anxious because you're pointing out my anxiety. I'm more anxious because of there's, like you said, there's evidence here. This is not my anxiety that's coming from nowhere. I didn't go on my first walk with my dog anxious. I went on my first walk with him excited, and then reactivity showed up, and I was like, oh no, what is this? What's happening? Right? And it got worse and worse, and all of those things. So did you hear my big sigh when you described that statement? Right there. First of all, there is some truth to it, right? I don't want to take away and say, like, that's complete crap. Like, no, there's some truth to it, but the way it's presented and the way it's amplified is problematic and harmful to people who are struggling with their own emotions, their own anxiety, their own mental health stuff in relation to their dogs. Because then people take that on and they take full responsibility for that and they blame themselves way more than is appropriate. So
Yeah.
I'm always trying to help clients balance, right? Like take responsibility for what you should take responsibility for. You are a part of it, right? This is a relationship, like I said before, but there are tons of factors that go into your dog having anxiety. There are tons of things that are completely out of your control that either created or maintain that. And it's not all you. They can pick up on your heart rate changes. They can pick up on your tension. They can pick up on your breathing rate. And so, yes, we have a part to play, but it's not just you. And I think that that's what a lot of trainers are kind of missing the nuance of that statement. And what ends up happening is people take so much responsibility that they feel guilty, they blame themselves, and they really shut down and feel like they're failing their dogs because they can't just calm down, which isn't a thing, right? Someone just tells you to calm down. It doesn't work.
Oh my God, I have been told that so many times. I've even
Oh,
had
sure.
somebody yelled that at me where they had an off-leash
Oh
pit
my
bull that
gosh.
ran up. I have Lucky's a little 10-pound Chihuahua, and I do the thing, even though trainers have often said, don't pick your little dog up. When an off-leash dog is running at
Yeah.
him in attack mode, I'm picking him
Mm-hmm.
up. So I
Sure.
picked him up, and the dog comes up and nips right at him, has his
Oh,
whole rear end in the dog's mouth, and I'm screaming profanities. I'll admit it, I was
sure.
profanities.
100% warranted in this moment, I think.
It's
Yeah.
like, get your dog.
Yeah.
And the guy actually said to me, you just need to calm down. And I felt in that moment too, I'm going to bring in a little
Mm,
gender issue here as well, because I feel
mhm,
like that's part of it too, where you were talking about people pleasing, etc. I think as
mhm.
women, we can often embody that. And when somebody,
Sure.
especially of the of the male persuasion, is yelling at me to calm down, it
Mm,
felt so belittling and demeaning, and like my
yeah.
voice wasn't deserving of being heard. And
Right.
part of the issue for me after that was, not only now do I have this dog who's freaked out, and so now anytime we see a dog
Yeah.
that looks remotely like a pit bull, he is screaming before we even get near it,
Oh,
understandably so, right?
yeah.
But then
Oh,
I'm
buddy.
I'm carrying all of that emotional weight.
Yeah.
I'm carrying that fear of, oh my
Hmm.
God, what's going to happen? As well as feeling like I was rehearsing what I wish I'd said in that moment,
Hmm.
all of that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. And it becomes this mental game that I'm the one carrying it forward, right?
Yeah.
I'm the one keeping the sort of torture going
Hmm.
on. And I think it's so valuable for others who have had those kinds of situations or similar sorts of things where that is a mental health issue, right? Like it's
Sure.
calling out for you to take care of yourself in
Hmm.
that moment. Kind of forget about the dog in a sense. Like we deal with that separately, but you need to take care of yourself because
Right.
you experience that trauma too.
Right, exactly. It wasn't just your dog that had an incident. You both had an incident, and you both have your own unique reactions to that experience. And like you said, you're carrying that forward a lot of the time, especially because, you're fearful of what might happen to your dog. Like you don't want them to get hurt. You don't want other people's dogs to get hurt. Your dog has a fallout from all of that. I mean, it's a huge ripple effect that happens. And I think that when we tell ourselves, because we do this to ourselves too, we tell ourselves, like, I got to move on, I got to get over it, I can handle it. Like we try to talk ourselves out of it, which is a tool, right? So using some cognitive mindset techniques to talk ourselves through things is an important tool, but it needs to go hand in hand with acknowledging the emotional experience that we've had so that we are not just invalidating ourselves and trying to talk ourselves out of our feelings. So whenever I'm working with someone and I talk about the mindset piece, right? Like, let's look at your belief system here. Let's look at your thought process here. Is it accurate? Is it helpful? Can we kind of break it down? And they don't necessarily connect with that right away. It just tells me that they're also trying to talk themselves out of their feeling, which is not what we're trying to do, right? We want to spend some time with those feelings and allow them to be felt, allow them to be acknowledged and validated. And then once we do that, they actually sort of start to quiet down a little bit automatically. They start to feel a little bit less intense when we acknowledge them and sit with them. And then we can get to some of the mindset work that helps us look back at situations with a little bit more clarity and carry it forward, hopefully in a different way.
Absolutely. Definitely. And, from a kind of spiritual perspective, we often talk about as well, like sitting with those emotions and
Mm.
acknowledging them, that we tend to stuff emotions down and they pop
Oh
up in
yeah.
different ways. Like we talk about this with our dogs too. If we're stifling something, the reactivity is going to pop up
Hmm.
in different ways. And oftentimes those emotions are just asking to be witnessed. You don't necessarily have
Yes.
to do a deep dive into them, but it's like
Right.
creating a space for them to be there, and then you move forward from it.
Right, exactly. And the louder and more intense they are, the more they're asking for you to sit with them and feel them and acknowledge them. And it's wild how every time you just say, "Wow, I'm feeling really anxious in this moment," or "I'm very overwhelmed," or whatever it is, anytime that you name that, it that in and of itself is helpful. That alone brings the intensity down a couple of notches so that you can kind of get back to maybe some of your coping skills or maybe some of your mindset work.
Totally, totally. I
Mhm.
wondered if we could kind of talk specifically too around I noticed that you had posted about being over threshold.
Hmm.
And that's a term that we're very confident and comfortable using when it comes to reactive dogs, and we understand
Yep.
what that means. But I think we often forget that we can become over threshold as well.
Yep.
And sometimes in response to our dogs, but also in other situations in life. And I wondered if
Sure.
you could talk about a little bit, what are some things that you recommend to
Mhm.
to sort of turn the mirror onto ourselves for looking at being over threshold, and how we can support ourselves as reactive dog owners in those moments?
Sure. So, first of all, this is something I love talking about because I think it's the perfect parallel to what our dogs go through and what we keep in the forefront of our minds about them all the time, right? I want to keep him below threshold. He is over threshold. Like we talk about it constantly in terms of them. So the first piece is bringing awareness, right? That is just always, I mentioned that before, that is just always the thing that we have to start with. If we're not fully aware of what sort of process is happening, what's going on, how we're feeling, where we're getting to, we're not really going to effectively elicit any kind of change. So if you could start to think about think about the kind of metaphor of like a ladder or, a volcano that's going to erupt or something, right? As you're sort of climbing that ladder and you're getting closer and closer to being over thresholds, then at what point do you actually need to intervene? Hopefully not when you're at a 10 out of 10. It's more helpful to intervene at a 4 and a 5 than it is when you're already you're too far gone. And we know that to be true about our dogs as well, right? When we can tell that they're sort of the trigger stacking is happening, they're kind of on edge. Like we want to intervene, introduce decompression, support them in whatever way we can earlier, before the big blow up, before the meltdown. So I think we're not as aware of our escalation as we need to be. And we're definitely not aware of our escalation in comparison to how much we're aware of it when it comes to our dogs. So if you just did more check-ins with yourself, that alone would be helpful. Like you don't even have to get into like the next pieces of let's look at the mindset and let's use coping skills and all that. If you had a bit more awareness of where you are in your sort of escalation cycle in any given moment, you will be better able to decide how to stay regulated, decide how to make choices that are the best fit for both of you instead of just your dog, and decide like what you can handle and tolerate. So in the therapy world, we call it like a subjective units of distress scale, right? So you can look that up if you want to, but as a SUD scale is what we call it. And it's usually like a 1 to 10, and we ask people to rate, right, their level of emotional intensity, 1 to 10. So in my programs, I have people actually create their own version so that they can label what do they look like at a 1? What do they look like at a 2, 3, 4, 5? What does a 10 look like for you? Because my reactivity, so to speak, is going to look different than yours, right? So if I'm highly anxious, I'm very tearful, I'm very shut down. I'm not, I kind of get like lower energy in a way. It's more of a shutdown response for me, whereas sometimes people are more activated, they're more irritable, right? So it just looks different. So my awareness of, oh, I'm starting to escalate, I'm starting to feel off is going to look different than yours, but I need to know when it's coming, right? And so when I do, and I can recognize that I'm halfway to my my 10 on my SUD scale, then I can maybe hopefully intervene earlier and look at my emotional state, name it, like I said before, to kind of diffuse it a little bit. Use some of the coping and grounding techniques that are helpful for me. I personally really love like a progressive muscle relaxation approach. That's my personal favorite, but not everyone likes that. You have to find the grounding and coping skills that really feel good for you. And that one feels really good for me. And then I can sort of look at my mindset as well when I'm not too overactivated emotionally. I can say, am I being fair about this situation? Am I viewing it in an accurate light? Am I perseverating on something that's not helpful to think about, even if it does have some accuracy to it, right? How can I shift to a more helpful mindset? And you can't do any of that when you're already over threshold.
No, not at
No,
all.
no. You have to you have to bring it down to
Yeah.
be able to access the parts of your brain that are going to help you through that moment.
Yeah, totally. There were two things that came up for me while you were talking that I think are really helpful as well. And that is, I was recently talking to dog trainer Nikki French about the trigger stacking within dogs
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
how so much of the sort of things that we are not necessarily aware that our dogs are picking up on are possibly contributing to what we then see as reactivity out the door.
mm.
So, for example, like you might think your dog is nice and calm because they've been in the house, and then you go out on the walk and they explode immediately, or like, but
Oh,
when
yeah.
the trigger stacked? I didn't like, we were at home. I didn't see this.
Right.
And I think, again, putting that mirror back on us, like there are often little things that seem really minor that at first we might not recognize we're getting triggered by. And so
Right.
the approach that you're offering of like giving ourselves like a soft tool for self-exploration, like you're saying, well, we're not in at number 10 or even number
Mm-hmm.
7, right? But to
Right.
sort of look
Right.
at
Exactly.
what are the things that might actually be going on here that I wouldn't have necessarily identified as triggers, but they're absolutely adding to that
Mm-hmm.
stacking. And how do we
Right.
give ourselves outlets? And the other
Right.
thing that kind of relates to that too is I had the personal experience of going through cognitive behavioral therapy
Mm-hmm.
when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And I was
Mm.
in the kind of beginning stages of my PhD. And I'm somebody that is very good at intellectualizing emotions.
Me too. I am
Yeah,
excellent at that. Yeah.
to a fault.
My therapist does not let me get away with it, which is good, but I am great at it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I had the gift of my PhD supervisor. We had the kind of relationship where we talk about, I mean, that's sort of the nature of being in a PhD is like you develop more of a relationship with your
Sure.
supervisors. And so what's going on in life? And I just was like, oh, my dad's been diagnosed with cancer and, move on to the next thing. And she was like, hold on a second. I think we,
Wait a minute.
I think we need to
Circle
rewind.
back to that. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she recommended that I go to the school's counseling team.
Mm.
And I went, and I was really grateful that I was placed with somebody who was trained in CBT. And
Mm.
she picked up on immediately that I'm a master at intellectualizing emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that was really great was she used CBT to my own advantage because one of the exercise that she did that I think is applicable to what you're talking about and was so helpful for me and for somebody like me, who I'm sure there are many listeners out there as well that are like us that can intellectualize their
Mm-hmm.
emotions. She would catch me on things that I was saying, like, I'm a bad daughter, or,
Right.
anything, right? Like that we
Yeah.
would come up with. And she was like, okay, that's great. So, what I'd like you to do is take a piece of paper and draw a T on it. So, basically, like a line down the center of
Mm-hmm.
the paper. And I want you to, like a CSI investigation, I want you to write down what you just said on the left-hand side of that column. And then on the right, I want to give you factual evidence for why that's true.
Right. Yep.
And I was like,
Whoops.
um, and
Right.
it was brilliant.
Uh-oh, can't find. Yeah.
Can't find any. And so
Yeah.
it was great for disrupting that
Yep.
kind of habit and that story that I would tell myself
Yes.
that had no basis, right? I'm making that up, totally
Right.
making it up. But
Right.
I'm living my life from that story was the
Mm-hmm.
key she wanted me to see, and that I had agency to choose differently about
Right.
that.
Right.
And so I wondered if you could talk about sort of approaches like that, I mean, I think we do that with our dogs too. We're more
Mhm.
likely to do that with our dogs. But what are some tools, maybe like that one or other tools that you find are really helpful for helping the dog owner to disrupt the stories, the patterns, etc., that they're telling themselves, to then be able to come to a place to actually look at what's going on a little bit
Right.
more objectively?
Right, right. So I love that. I love CBT. CBT is a lot of what I teach to dog owners because I think it's very accessible. I think it's something that you can learn the skills to apply on your own, and you don't necessarily need long-term therapy or anything like that to kind of utilize. So that's why I utilize it very heavily in my coaching work and in my programs because I want people to have those tools that they don't need me or a therapist necessarily to forever walk them through, right? So there are some therapy approaches I would not recommend to do on your own. And then there are others that I think are very accessible. And CBT, I think, is one of them. So I love it. I'm trained in it as well. And the idea of kind of looking at the evidence of both sides of things is so helpful and important. There's kind of questions to ask yourself to help you challenge some of those thoughts and disrupt those patterns. But I do want to say first that a lot of people, and I completely do understand this, have an issue with how CBT can sometimes feel invalidating of our emotions or of our experience, right? If you deeply feel like I'm a bad daughter, or you deeply feel like I'm a bad dog owner, or you deeply believe that you have failed your dog because, and maybe you do have some evidence that makes you think you failed, right? Like I took them to a dog park when I didn't know that they were going to get this, sometimes there are things that we can use as evidence to say, well, this feels true because, this and that and the other thing. So I love taking a CBT lens that makes sure that we're really validating how we're feeling because we can't just tell ourselves to feel differently. Yes, when we disrupt patterns over time, it does help us to shift our emotional response because the emotions come from our thoughts and come from our mindset, and then that impacts our behavior from there. And there's a bit of a cycle that goes on. But I think making sure that you validate what you're feeling in that moment and acknowledge what you're feeling. Like, I feel grief, I feel shame, I feel, anxiety or whatever it is first to bring that emotional intensity down and recognize that whether or not the thought that's coming from it is accurate, which it's probably not, as discovered when you did this, the thought is probably not accurate and certainly not helpful, but the feeling is still there and it's still very real. So we want to acknowledge that and then work on disrupting the mindset, and those things kind of in tandem, I think are helpful approaches. In terms of sort of other techniques that I think are helpful for disrupting thought patterns that are not accurate or helpful. My favorite one, and this I didn't make this one up, the go-to for me though that I teach everyone is, would you say that to someone you care about? And the answer is resoundingly no. In fact, people laugh at me when I make them think about saying something that they're saying to themselves back to me or to someone else. Or if I come to them and I say, so if I were to tell you, I failed Dio, right? He's 10 and he still has reactivity challenges sometimes. Like, I'm a bad dog owner. I failed him. I didn't fix it, all of that. Would you look at me and be like, yeah, you failed. You are a failure. No, of course not. It's like ridiculous. You would ever validate someone else's thoughts like that. And yet we just let ours exist with no challenge, with no questioning. We're just like, yep, that must be true. I thought it, so it must be true. So if you wouldn't say that to a friend or a loved one, if you wouldn't validate someone else saying that to you, then you know that that thought is not one that we want to invest in, that we want to put a bunch of stock in. We definitely want to disrupt that, and it's impacting you in ways that you don't want.
100%. I've heard another version
Yep.
of that, which makes it even worse to say.
Uh-oh.
It's like, would you say that to a 5-year-old who's
Oh
crying?
gosh, yes.
Right? Like,
Oh, I just got a chill.
right?
Yes, I'm gonna use that too
Yeah.
if I need a heavier one, I'm gonna
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's pull it out the
Oh,
big guns. Like, would you say that
yes.
to a 5-year-old? Oh my goodness, no, I would never say something like that. So again, why am I saying it to
Mhm.
myself? Yeah.
Right, right. And we
Uh,
all go like, well, I'm the exception. No, you're not. Right? Like, no, you're not. We all have negative, unhelpful automatic thoughts. This is part of being a human. It's just your brain doing its thing. It's your brain being a brain. And we have a negativity bias in our mindsets. That's just a natural thing that we have. And so we have to actively work against that. And we've had a lifetime of experiences that have solidified some of these belief systems and solidified some of those thoughts that are now applying themselves to life with your dog. Right.
100%.
So if you struggle with feeling like a failure, if you're not perfect with your dog, I 1000% will bet money that you feel that way somewhere else in a different part of your life, and you haven't dug underneath all of that to uncover that theme, that belief system, and heal that belief system from, the root.
100%. And I actually think from a kind of more spiritual perspective that that's a big
Mm.
reason why the particular dogs that we have come into
Find
our
us.
lives. They do.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, I've talked about on the podcast before
Yeah.
that I was at, when Lucky came into my life, I was at a really difficult place in my life and going through
Mm.
some real change and not really knowing what I was doing. And I was in Mexico visiting my mom, and I decided to go to a local curandero, which is like a healer,
Mm.
because I was like, I think I need my chakras unblocking or something. Like, I can't shake this thing. And I go there and he laughs at me. And he's like, you don't need your chakras unblocking. You're a bruja, or like a witch, or an energy
Hmm.
work. Someone who works with
Hmm.
energy. And you need to learn to work with your energy better. And by the way, keep an eye out for dogs and cats that cross your path because they're healers for you. And
Uh-oh.
well, exactly. And I had in my mind, oh my gosh, this cute, wonderful little puppy's going to come into my life and like join me as my little comrade,
Oh,
like roses, rainbows, unicorns, right? That was
sure.
there. And yeah, my little teacher literally showed up with a knock on the door, and I was not prepared for what he
Hmm.
was bringing up in terms of like, from a Jungian perspective, we often talk about shadow work, the kinds of
Hmm.
the parts
Hmm.
of ourselves that we don't necessarily want to see. He is the master at bringing that forward in me.
Yep.
And I'm convinced that that's a big reason why he came into my life, is to provide that opportunity for me if I choose to, right? Because I can ignore the
Hmm.
opportunity,
Oh,
but
sure.
it'll keep presenting itself
Yes,
for
it
me
will.
for me to look at those parts of me. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's actually because without, like, dogs have this, it's not only that they are presenting it to you, but they put you in situations that you don't normally go into,
Yeah, that's
right?
very true. Right,
That
right.
that then create those opportunities that otherwise you
Hmm.
wouldn't have the opportunity to see yourself in those situations or see how
Right,
you would
right.
respond.
Or if you do experience something that brings that up, it's a lot easier to look away or to ignore your part in it or your perspective or your reaction. But your dog doesn't really let you do that because they're another sort of being outside of yourself who I always say to people, I'm like, they're just going to continue to shine a spotlight on this until you look at it with them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that once you do that inner work, they won't be reactive anymore either, right? So there's a bit of a, I think sometimes people find my work and they're like, oh, well, if I just fix me, then that will fix them. But really, that's not how it works either because no one needs fixing, including them. And we need to find ways to coexist with them and with ourselves exactly as we are because they're worthy just as they are, as are we, and we can access joy with our dogs at any time despite their behavioral challenges, and we can do that for ourselves too. So while Dio has, specifically in my case, has come a very long way when it comes to behavior and anxiety and reactivity, he's still a reactive dog. But my response to that is completely different. And what that has brought up in me has, shifted over the last 10 years. So I, of course, still have my moments of being like, oh, that really sucked. Like when he had a reaction, or I feel embarrassed, or I feel all of the things, right? Sometimes I am like, it's been 10 years. Why are we still doing this? Right. Yes, I absolutely still have those responses. But I think the difference is that I no longer live there, right? I feel those moments, I have those experiences, I have those emotions, and I don't color my entire experience with my dog that way anymore. And I can look at all of the nuance in my relationship with him and find so much joy and comfort and satisfaction and fun and wonderful, beautiful things in my relationship with him. And reactivity and the challenges that we both have with that is just a part of him and who he is and a part of our relationship. It doesn't define it, and it absolutely used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Big time.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh my God. Yes to all of this.
Hmm.
100%. That is like you're describing my story with Lucky. And I
Yeah.
think you make a really, really good and important point that I want to highlight with what you just said. And that is our tendency to want to fix.
Hmm.
That there's something wrong. And so, I mean, I see so many people doing this, even from a canine nutrition perspective, that people will come saying, I've got this problem, I want to fix it. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so ingrained in our culture. And I think even like our medical systems are set up like that, fix the problem, the allopathic system anyway, about like,
Hmm. Hmm.
here's a symptom, get rid of the symptom. But
Right.
even from people who are into more holistic approaches, I see this mindset still coming in of like, well, I'm just going to ask for a herb that's going to fix that thing.
Right.
We want to like
Right.
get rid of instead
Yep.
of integrating
Right.
and allowing ourselves, seeing that we are already whole, our dogs
Hmm.
are already whole, and
Hmm.
giving ourselves that grace and that permission to truly be. And
Hmm.
again, it's we don't allow it for our dogs because we don't allow it for ourselves. So that's where
Right.
it does start with us, right?
Right.
We have put
Sure.
those expectations onto the dog that they need to look, be, behave, perform, whatever in a certain way.
Hmm.
And there's an opportunity for us to kind of like flip that back and say, well, am I expecting that because I'm actually expecting that of myself?
Sure.
If that was
Sure. Absolutely.
Lucky clawing out of his carrier. Thanks, Lucky.
He had
He's
a
like,
reaction to that. He was
I
like,
know.
interesting. Yeah, Dio did that last night. I was on a group call with like the trainers that I have or am currently working with in the group I'm running for trainers. And I said something about him, and now I can't remember what it was, but he stood up and he woke up and stood up and shook and left the room. And I was like, sorry, buddy. He had a feeling about whatever it was I was talking about. It was everyone was cracking up. It was like so well timed. So yeah, they know more than we give them
They
credit for. But
totally do.
I will say that like yes, it's so true about, we get so focused on fixing and we get so focused on solving. But I also want to validate that urge and validate that need because,
Yeah.
it's very real what we're going through. Like you said before, right? I'm anxious walking my dog because I have a reason to feel anxious. Look at what has happened or look at how he has behaved. People who have dogs with serious aggression, and things like that, it's valid that you feel the way that you feel. And it's valid that you want to fix it and solve it and not have this in your life anymore. So you can go forward with wanting to continue to solve, I guess, and figure it out and work through it together. You don't have to let that go and go to the other extreme and say like, well, I just have to accept it for, how it
Right.
is. No, you don't. It can get better. But if we are completely focused on one particular outcome or one very sort of narrow view or idea of something, then we can really be setting ourselves and our dogs up for failure when life may not look the way that we think it will. And that might be okay. And it might take some grief work to kind of process through. I mean, that's one thing that was true for me with Dio wanting him to be a therapy dog, right? Like I was I had a very tunnel vision kind of, you know, approach to that. I was not acknowledging his anxiety. I was not acknowledging his preferences for a while, honestly. I didn't know to do that, first of all, so I didn't necessarily know better, but I also wasn't open probably to recognizing the bigger picture because it wasn't fitting with the expectation that I had of him and what I wanted our life to look like. And our life doesn't look like the way I thought it would. And that did take some grieving, right? And I've worked with people who have had dogs who have, bitten them in the face, and life is going to look different for them than they anticipated. And that is fair to grieve that, and to recognize that I may not have the dog that I envisioned, but I am committing to the dog I have. And so how can I appreciate them for who they are? How can I appreciate myself for who I am with them and do both things at the same time, right? So practicing acceptance does not mean giving up on trying to make it better, right?
Right.
But our brains are not great at holding two seemingly opposing things to be true at the same time. So we have to really actively work on that.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree. And I really do think that it's a both and situation, that it is
Hmm.
acknowledging the emotions and acknowledging
Yep.
the desires and being really present to the situation that's in front of you and working with that
Right.
rather than just putting these blinders and these expectations of this is what I think it should look like. Again, questioning
Mhm.
where did that story come
Where
from
did
about,
exactly? Yeah.
right?
Where's the source of your expectations? That's something we talk a lot about in my groups because I think that we don't realize that we all have this picture, first of all, of dogs in general, that comes from our early experiences with dogs, that come from the media, that come from our families of origin and their belief systems about the role of dogs, right? So different families and different people have dogs for different roles and purposes. And that is going to impact the way that you see a dog fitting into your life and how that should look. So there's so many things that create our expectations, and our expectations can be a little bit sneaky. Like they are underneath a lot of our frustration a lot of the time. So even if we logically know they're not a helpful expectation to have, sometimes they still keep showing up over and over again. And we have to have that practice of checking in and that practice of bringing awareness to what's the root of my current frustration or my current anxiety or overwhelm or whatever it is when it comes to my dog.
100%. And I would add to that too, that just asking the question and not necessarily being able to answer it immediately, it
Mm-hmm.
then sets that awareness. You start to go through life with that lens of curiosity around,
Sure.
oh, I
Yeah.
didn't realize. Oh, and this and this. And again, back
Mm-hmm.
to the various things that we don't recognize are trigger stacking for us.
Mm-hmm.
It helps us to start to see a lot of that stuff and piece the puzzle together to understand okay, this is where it's kind of coming from, and then be empowered to say, and is that helping me?
Right. Right. Yeah. Things might be a little bit true. They might have some accuracy to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're helpful to sort of dwell in and fixate on. Right? So it is true that my dog is 10 years old and still has reactive behavior sometimes. But is it helpful if I just sit there and stew on that? No. It's also true that he is the, best bed sharer, snuggler that exists. It's also true that we have the most awesome adventures when we get a chance to go on hikes together because he is amazing at off-leash reliability at this point because we have worked very hard for that. But we have worked so hard at it, but I feel this incredible connection to him that all of those things are still true, even though he still has some of the behavioral challenges that, like, yeah, I wish we didn't have to deal with, but here we are,
Mhm.
right? So is it helpful for me to only think about that? No.
Right.
It makes me
Right.
miss all the other pieces that are wonderful about him and that I wouldn't change.
And the same about us,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Seeing all of those things about ourselves too. Oh,
Right.
100%. Again, it's a
Right.
both and situation. And I
Hmm.
think dogs, you're right that we have a hard time holding two truths that seem opposing. But I
Hmm.
think dogs are a great way to practice a lot of this.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
they really invite us because we are so attached to them, right? We love them so
Hmm.
unconditionally. They love us so unconditionally. And so
Right.
it's like, well, how can I see you as just like one thing? That's not true. That's not true at all. And
Right.
so it then expands our vision around the possibility of that for ourselves too.
Right. It's such an interesting relationship dynamic to be able to like practice some of this and bring awareness to some of this because now I'm a new mom, right? My kids are going to turn 18 months soon in like a week.
Oh,
And yes, I know.
congrats.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we've survived so far. We've survived twins till a year and a half, so we can, that's something to celebrate for sure. But I will say that like my experiences with Dio and my relationship with him have absolutely impacted the relationships that I hope to, continue to develop with my kids as they grow up. And it's made me look at the expectations that I've had of them, even as babies, right? Like
Mhm.
it's an automatic thing,
Yeah.
right? You have a kid, you get a dog, you think like this is how it's going to look. This is how we're going to do this together. And they're going to be like that. And my newborn phase with them is going to look this way. And then like inevitably that does not happen with any of them, whether it's dogs or kids. and it turns your vision on its head. And so you can either constantly be fighting against that and be frustrated and dissatisfied and stressed, or you can step back and let these beings be who they are and figure out how you can navigate life with who they are versus against who they are and trying to change and fix who they are. And so it's extra interesting to have twins because they're very different. You know, obviously they're different people, but my boys are like such opposites. And so it's been an interesting thing to think about how I've kind of been through this with Dio, where I have this being that I love so much who's outside of me. And he is who he is, regardless of what I do or don't do in some ways, right? So I do have influence, but I have two kids born at the same time to the same parents, and they are still, and they've had the same life experiences up to this point, and already they are different from one another and different than I expected that they would be. And so Dio already taught me how to deal with that and how to find that openness and curiosity versus sticking to my expectation, because that's harmful to me and to him, and it would be to my kids too. So it's been such an interesting like process to have had a reactive dog for as long as I've had and then to have kids later. It's
I can
a whole other
imagine.
podcast to talk
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I actually have a friend who talks about her experience with gentle parenting and relating that
Hmm.
to how
Oh
she's
yeah.
approached her dog. And I think, yeah, it's very similar. It's very,
Yes.
especially when we flip what we think of as our role with both our dogs and with our kids, that
Hmm.
it when we kind of take the perspective of like stewarding and guiding,
Yes.
right? Versus
Yes.
like the controlling of, you got to fall in line, or the kind of like the alpha
Hmm.
mentality that we used to have with dogs, that we do that because we were raised oftentimes in that. Like it
Yes.
comes from us, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Oh my
so,
gosh.
right? So when we switch it to that sense of like just simply like asking, like, so how do I guide my dog through this? What
Hmm.
could that look like? And I think
Right.
that opens up, it has for me anyways with Lucky, where it's removed a lot of um where I have felt really constricted, like things like you've been saying, like that things have to look a certain way, that I have to
Yeah.
handle a situation in a certain way or what have you, and which made me feel very limited in my life with
Hmm.
him,
Hmm.
to a place where I can feel again that both and situation. He can be reactive and we can have all these amazing experiences, and things can look different from what they currently look like. Like it just
Hmm.
is such a more expansive relationship than
Right.
this like if you don't fall into line, if things don't look this way, I'm a failure, you're a failure,
Right.
all of that stuff.
Right. It just all it does is rob you of joy and robs you of connection ultimately with your dog. And like I said, those things are accessible to us regardless of where we are in our training journey. We can still find moments of joy with them and we can still find moments of connection with them and build on those things, really, regardless of whether or not things are fixed yet,
Hmm.
right? Absolutely still acknowledging that sometimes we're in very serious situations with our dogs. Like sometimes people have very, very dangerous dogs who they're trying to navigate and all and it can be very hard to find joy and connection. But everything always exists together, right? There's never nothing is ever all or nothing.
Right.
So, even if it's small, it still exists. And it's more helpful to us to find that and balance it than only focusing on this never works, this will never get better, and all of those sort of things that we get really fixated on and that we want to change. And that idea of being a guide or a steward is just, I just really love that. I think that's such a beautiful way of putting it because I think sometimes we can get, I kind of mentioned this before in terms of the level of responsibility that we take on. um, we are absolutely responsible for our dogs, for their well-being in the world, for them, for teaching them how to navigate the world appropriately. So it's not to let anybody off the hook in
Hmm.
terms of being like, well, my dog is who they are. I'm not going to work on it. No, the opposite is true. You are responsible for helping them learn how to live well with you, right? But you're not responsible for why they are the way they are necessarily. Like that's not all on you. While you have a part to play, like I said before, it's not all on you. So take responsibility for the action versus, well, it's all my fault, so there's nothing I can do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, 100%. 100%. Oh, that's so helpful. Jess, I know that you work with dog trainers as well, in helping
Hmm.
them navigate the kind of the human end of the leash as well,
Hmm.
because I think I think a lot of dog trainers go into dog training because they love dogs and then they quickly
Yeah.
realize, oh, this is really all about people.
It's all about people. Yep.
And I wonder if you could just touch on a little bit with how you work with trainers in those situations too.
Yeah, so the program I have for trainers is called Person-Centered Dog Training, and it really is all of, I always call it counseling school day one because it's all of the things that I learned in my master's program, like the foundational things, right? So the how to create a safety in your relationship with a client, how to create that rapport, that strong rapport that you need to help clients move towards change, and how to recognize how to meet clients where they are. Because it's not necessarily the case that even though someone is coming to you and paying you for dog training, that they're necessarily ready to do all of the things that you are going to recommend that they do. And that is absolutely true for therapists, right? Like it doesn't mean just because someone comes to me for therapy doesn't mean they're ready to go into all of the things that I think would be helpful for them, right? That's their journey, that's their process. That's not for me to dictate in any way, right? But it's very challenging because people have a lot of expectations of trainers. They have a lot of expectations of what dog training is supposed to look like. There are people who come and sort of expect trainers to teach their dogs certain skills, and that means they're trained, and that means that they don't have to do any more of the work and they've fixed it all and all that. And all of those things happen for me as a therapist too, right? I work a lot. I work with kids a lot. I work with teenagers a lot. I have parents who will leave their child with me in my office for 1 hour a week and then not make any changes themselves and expect me to like tell their kid to listen, which is like the most hilarious thing to me, as if I could do that for them, right? So trainers go through basically the same stuff that I go through as a therapist to a T. Like the parallels are nonstop. It's just constant. I'm finding new ones all the time the more I talk to trainers. So it's a program where I teach the terms for some of I name a lot of the things that we experience as therapists that we learn about as therapists so that trainers have context for what they're experiencing. And the flip side of it then is we have sort of a case consultation model within that so that trainers can bring their tough human client situations to a place to talk about those pieces and get feedback and support on that aspect because they know what to do with the dog's behavior, but they don't necessarily know how to navigate always what the human is bringing to the table. And the other part of the program really focuses on the trainer's well-being and boundaries and burnout because that's also super similar to what we go through as therapists, but trainers are also not taught how to recognize that in themselves until it's too late. Typically, we have trainers who burn out and leave the field, and we need you all to stay. So this is why we need good trainers who care about people just as much as they care about dogs. And so that's what I try to give some education around and support around.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I agree. So needed, so needed. And we need trainers. We definitely need trainers in this world.
Yes,
That's
yes,
so important.
please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I agree. And for owners who are
Mhm.
interested in getting some additional support, what is it that you offer for them?
Yes. So I have a community space that incorporates self-paced learning in terms of learning coping skills, learning a lot of this CBT stuff, all really tailored to dog owners, reactive dog owners. And so all of that is in the complex canine community is what it's called. And so we've got courses and resources in there for people to kind of check out whatever would be a fit for them or whatever they think would be most helpful. There's discussion threads in there. And we also do a twice a month group support call live on Zoom. So I will have a theme each month and we kind of do an exercise together as a group and then talk about it and process it and just hear from one another what we're going through. So the entire community is not about dog training, but it's about your experience in dog training. So we really focus on, what is this bringing up for you? How can we support you? People celebrate wins in there. People go in there to vent about a rough moment they've had and kind of get support from others who get it. And I'm always chiming in with my sort of human mental health perspective on everybody's posts all the time. And the live support group piece is really fun because we focus on a particular topic and then talk about our own personal experiences with it. And it's been really powerful for people to hear and get to talk about those things with one another and, have me facilitating that from my lens as a therapist and a coach.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's such power in being witnessed,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's what I think, especially now in the kind of digital age. I mean, there's really
Hmm.
valuable things to the digital age, but unless you're seeking out communities like this,
Right.
you can feel really alone, especially if you don't have
Hmm.
anyone in your immediate surroundings who's got the same kind of experience with your dog. It can feel like
Right.
I'm the only one,
Right.
right? And
Right.
then you come
Yep.
into a community space like yours, and it's like I'm not the only one,
Yep.
and
Right. You're
and
far from it. Yeah,
far from it.
absolutely.
And you
Yep.
can learn from other people's wins and
Hmm.
successes and stuff. Yeah, that's really
Yep.
wonderful. And
Yep.
so
Yeah.
people can find all the information that they need for that on your website.
Yep. Yep. handlersandhumans.com. And I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's my platform of choice, I would say. And so you can find me at Handlers and Humans on Instagram too.
Perfect. I'm going to leave all that information in the show notes. So if you want to directly connect through there, easy enough. Jess, is
Thanks.
there, yeah, no, thank you. Jess, is there anything else that you'd like to add that maybe I've not asked you about that you think is
Mm.
important to this?
I feel like I've been talking about this a lot, so I want to throw it out there because I want everyone to go play with your dog a little bit today. So we're talking about all of the emotional fallout and the challenges and the reactivity, and the power of play is going to be one of the most healing things that you can experience together. And so that's what I would like to end on, is just throwing out there, go play for a little
Amazing.
bit today.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I am going to ask you one final question
Oh,
though,
sure.
that I ask all of my guests. And this might be related to Dio particularly, or it might be
Mhm.
dogs in general,
Mm.
in your experience with them. But what do you feel that dogs have taught you personally about what it means to be human?
Do we have another hour or Oh my gosh, I got like goosebumps when you asked me that. How can I bring this together? Honestly, I think that Dio specifically, I mean, I had dogs when I was younger, but Dio has been my only dog as a fully formed adult person. So he's brought me the most experience. And I think that he has taught me to practice mindfulness in the smaller, more regular, everyday moments. And that has transformed my own mental health in pretty significant ways. Um, I used to think mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness needed to be like sitting down and making time to meditate and, getting the apps that would guide me and the pillow to sit on and all of that. And really, he taught me that simplicity is the best way to go about really anything. Simplicity and curiosity. And I feel like that's contributed to my growth as a human in ways I probably can't even describe.
Oh, I love that so much. That's so beautiful. Oh, and what a legacy he's leaving.
Oh my gosh. It's, yeah, yeah. He is everything. He really is. I'm so grateful for him. And I'm at a point where I'm grateful for the challenges we've had because that's what has created this. And I love doing this.
I love that so much. Jess, thank you so, so very much. This has
Yeah,
been
thank
such a
you.
delightful conversation, and I know that
Yes.
it's going to help a lot of people to feel seen and heard and not alone, and to realize that they need to take care of themselves and give
Yes.
themselves the focus that they give their dogs. So
Yep.
thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with the wonderful Jess Adam of Handlers and Humans. I really hope you found a sense of comfort in the fact that you're not alone in navigating life with a complex dog, and that there's support available for you. You can find out more about Jess and her programs for dog parents and dog trainers alike on her website, handlersandhumans.com. I've left a link in the show notes. I personally believe that those of us who are lucky enough to welcome a reactive dog into our lives are chosen to do this because on some level we know that this opportunity will bring us so much expansion and growth. Like I said when I first started this podcast, we're walking the spiritual path with our dogs, and complex dogs in particular are some of the best teachers that show us just how deep our ability to hold compassion is for our dogs, for others, and for ourselves. So, my top 3 takeaways from this conversation with Jess. Okay, number 1, no one needs fixing. Not your dog, and not you. That's something I think is always helpful to be reminded of. Number 2, our complex dogs teach and prepare us to be open and curious, in large part because they ask us to also see all of the amazing qualities that they have and not just be defined by their reactive behaviors. And finally, number 3, allowing ourselves to grieve not having the life we thought we would have with our dog is such an important part of the process to opening to the dog that we do have and the life that we're creating with them. What were your biggest takeaways? Message me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. And remember to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Take a screenshot of your review and then send it to me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama in order to be considered for the free animal communication session that I'm giving away. Please make sure to send me your screenshot no later than Friday, May 24th, 2024. Okay, until next time.